Be happy with me. Inner Steel, full script. Nobody is coming. Not your old friends. Not the people who watched you fall. Not the version of your life that used to feel easy and full and warm. Nobody is coming back to make this feel okay. And somewhere deep in your chest, you already know that. But here is the question nobody is brave enough to ask. What if that is not the tragedy you think it is? What if the greatest freedom you have never let yourself feel is the freedom to be happy on your own terms, in your own silence, without needing anyone to hand it to you first? That is what we are building today. Not toxic positivity. Not forced smiles. Not pretending the hard things are not hard. We are building something rarer, something most people spend their entire lives chasing and never find. Genuine, unshakable, earned happiness. The kind that does not crack when people leave. The kind that does not collapse when circumstances change. The kind that lives in you, not around you. And if that is the kind of life you are here to build, stay with me. You are exactly where you need to be. Introduction. There is a man in history who had every reason to be miserable. He was born into slavery. He owned nothing, no legal rights, no property, no freedom of movement. His master, a cruel and capricious man, once deliberately twisted his leg until it broke, just to prove a point about power. The man did not scream. He simply looked at his master and said calmly, "You are going to break it." And when the bone snapped, he said, "Did I not tell you that you would break it?" His name was Epictetus. He went on to become one of the most influential philosophers in human history. He taught emperors. He shaped the thinking of Marcus Aurelius. He built a school of thought that still reaches across 2,000 years to steady the hands of people who are breaking right now, today, in this modern world. And his most powerful teaching was this: there is a line. Inside that line is everything you control. Your thoughts. Your reactions. Your effort. Your values. Your meaning. Outside that line is everything you do not control. Other people. Circumstances. Outcomes. Loss. Happiness, real happiness, lives inside the line. It always has. It always will. Most people never find this because they spend their entire lives chasing happiness outside the line. They chase it in relationships that are already hollow. They chase it in approval from people who barely know themselves. They chase it in success that never quite feels like enough. And every time something outside the line shifts, someone leaves, something fails, something changes, their happiness collapses. Because it was never truly theirs. This video is about reclaiming what is yours. Not bitterly. Not in isolation. Not with walls around your heart. But with a clarity about where you end and the world begins. A clarity that makes real joy possible, maybe for the first time. We have 9 truths today. 9 anchors. Each one is going to reframe how you think about what it means to feel genuinely good about being alive. And each one comes with a story, because that is how truth travels across time. In stories. In lives. In people who lived it so you would not have to figure it out alone. If this is the kind of content that builds something real in you, subscribe to Inner Steel right now. Hit that button. Because we are just getting started. 1. Stop waiting for permission to feel good. In the spring of 1944, a young woman sat in a hidden apartment in Amsterdam, listening to the sound of boots on cobblestones outside. She had not seen the sky in over a year. She had not walked freely, laughed without lowering her voice, or breathed outside without fear. She was 13 years old when she went into hiding. She was 15 now. And the world above her was trying to erase everyone she loved. And she wrote this in her diary. I don't think of all the misery, but of the beauty that still remains. Her name was Anne Frank. She wrote those words in the darkest circumstances imaginable, surrounded by fear, trapped in silence, facing a future no child should have to face. She did not wait for the circumstances to improve before she allowed herself to notice beauty. She did not wait for safety before she let herself feel something worth feeling. She found it anyway. Inside the line. Inside herself. Most of us are not in a hidden apartment. Most of us are not in danger. But most of us are waiting. Waiting for the situation to improve before we allow ourselves to feel okay. Waiting for someone to validate that it is alright to be happy now. Waiting for permission that no one is ever going to give us, because permission was never theirs to give. The Stoics called this the tyranny of postponement. The belief that joy is something you earn at the end, after the suffering is finished, after the losses are recovered, after the world rearranges itself into something agreeable. But the world does not rearrange itself. And the end keeps moving further away the closer you get. You do not need permission to feel good today. Not from your past. Not from the people who hurt you. Not from the circumstances that are still unresolved. You are allowed to notice the light coming through a window. You are allowed to feel the weight of a good cup of coffee in your hands. You are allowed to be genuinely glad to be alive in this body, on this day, even when the day is imperfect. Even when things are hard. Even when the full story is not yet written. And Frank did not wait for liberation to feel alive. She felt alive in the waiting. That is not naivety. That is the highest form of defiance a human being can demonstrate. The moment you stop waiting for permission, you take back power you did not even know you had given away. Claim it. Today. 2. Your inner world is the only world that is truly yours. In 1965, a United States Navy pilot named James Stockdale was shot down over North Vietnam. He was captured, tortured, and held as a prisoner of war for over 7 years in the Hanoi Hilton, one of the most brutal prison systems of the 20th century. He was beaten regularly. He was kept in isolation so prolonged that the silence itself became a weapon. He had no way of knowing if he would ever go home. He had no way of knowing if anyone even knew he was alive. And yet Stockdale later said something that stunned the people who interviewed him. He said that the prisoners who did not survive, psychologically or physically, were not the pessimists. They were the optimists. The ones who said, "We'll be out by Christmas." And Christmas came and went. By Easter. Easter came and went. Each broken deadline took another piece of them until there was nothing left to break. What kept Stockdale alive was something harder and cleaner than optimism. It was the commitment to face the brutal facts of his situation with absolute clarity, while never, not for a single day, surrendering the belief that he would one day prevail. Not through wishful thinking. Through building and protecting an inner world that could not be reached by the outer one. He controlled what he thought about. He controlled how he responded. He built structures of meaning inside his own mind while everything outside that mind was attempting to destroy him. He created a code system to communicate with other prisoners through tapping on walls, because even the act of maintaining connection through ingenuity was a way of choosing, actively, what kind of man he would be inside that cell. He survived. He came home. He became one of the most decorated naval officers in American history. This is the core of Stoic happiness. The outer world will always be uncertain. It will always be partly painful, partly unfair, partly outside your control. But your inner world, what you think, what you value, what you give your attention to, what you tell yourself this moment means, that is sovereign territory. Nobody can invade it without your permission. Nobody can colonize it without your cooperation. Most people let the outer world run the inner one. They let the news run their mood. They let other people's behavior define their self-worth. They let circumstances write the story they tell themselves about who they are. And then they wonder why happiness feels so fragile, so conditional, so dependent on things they cannot control. Protect your inner world like Stockdale protected his. Not with walls. With clarity. With intention. With the daily, disciplined practice of choosing what gets to live inside you and what does not get in at all. 3. Gratitude is not soft, it is armor. In 1942, a German theologian named Dietrich Bonhoeffer was arrested by the Gestapo for his involvement in the resistance against Adolf Hitler. He was imprisoned in Tegel prison, and later transferred as the war grew darker. He knew, with increasing certainty, that he would be executed. He had every reason to be consumed by bitterness, by rage, by a terror that would hollow a lesser man from the inside out. Instead, he wrote letters home that stunned his family. Letters filled with warmth, with attention to small things, a beam of sunlight crossing his cell floor, the sound of birds in the courtyard, the smell of bread from somewhere outside the walls. His family later said they could barely believe these letters were written by someone sitting in the shadow of a death sentence. He was executed in April 1945, weeks before the war ended. He was 39 years old. But those letters survived. And what they reveal is a man who had understood something most people never learn. Gratitude is not naivety. Gratitude is not the pretense that everything is fine. Gratitude is the discipline, and it is a discipline, of noticing what is real and good and present in a moment that also contains pain. Modern neuroscience has caught up to what Bonhoeffer and the Stoics already knew intuitively. When you practice deliberate gratitude, not forced positivity, not the performance of cheerfulness, but genuine, specific attention to what is real and good, you are literally rewiring the neural pathways that determine how your brain processes experience. You are training your attention muscle. You are building the capacity to find light even when the room is mostly dark. Marcus Aurelius began every morning by reminding himself of the gifts he had been given. Not as a ritual he had inherited. As a weapon he had built. A way of beginning each day in the right posture, oriented toward what is present rather than what is missing, toward abundance rather than lack. Most people do the opposite. They wake up and the mind immediately floods with the unresolved, the uncomfortable, the threatening. That is not weakness. That is biology, the negativity bias that kept our ancestors alive on the savannah. But you are not trying to survive a predator. You are trying to build a life. And that requires consciously overriding the default setting with something better. 3 things every morning. Not grand things. Real things. The fact that you woke up. The fact that your lungs are working without you asking them to. The fact that somewhere in the day ahead, there is a moment worth finding. Start there. Every single morning, start there. Over time, that practice does not just improve your mood. It changes the lens through which you see everything. And the lens is everything. 4. Stop needing people to validate your happiness. In 1934, a young woman from Eatonville, Florida, published a novel she had spent years writing. The critics dismissed it almost immediately. One prominent reviewer called it lightweight. Another said it lacked social and political urgency. The literary establishment of the time largely ignored it, or worse, condescended to it. The author had poured everything she had into that book, every feeling, every year of observation, every ounce of her inner life, and the gatekeepers handed it back with a shrug. She did not stop. She wrote because the act of writing was the thing, not the reception. She wrote because she had long ago made a decision that her creative life, her inner life, her sense of worth, were not available for other people to approve or revoke. Her name was Zora Neale Hurston. The book was Their Eyes Were Watching God. It is now considered one of the greatest American novels ever written. It is taught in universities around the world. It has sold millions of copies. But for decades before that recognition arrived, Zora Neale Hurston was the only one who knew what she had made, and she decided that was enough. She once wrote, "I am not tragically colored. There is no great sorrow dammed up in my soul, nor lurking behind my eyes. I do not mind at all." She was not performing in vulnerability. She had genuinely, through practice, through years of lived decision, stopped giving other people the power to narrate her experience. This is one of the most painful freedoms you will ever claim, the freedom to be happy without an audience. We have been trained, from childhood, to look for approval signals. We post something and watch for the response. We make a decision and need someone to say it was the right one. We feel a good feeling and immediately want to share it so it becomes real. But here is what nobody tells you. When you outsource the validation of your happiness, you also outsource its survival. If the approval disappears, the happiness disappears with it. You have handed the keys to someone who does not live in your house. The Stoics called this being enslaved to external opinion, doxa. And they were not gentle about it. They said clearly, a person whose good mood depends on what others think of them is a person who has no real freedom at all. They are a slave wearing civilian clothes. Your happiness does not need witnesses. It does not need applause. It does not need to be understood, shared, validated, or confirmed by anyone else to be real. Feel it in the privacy of your own chest. Let that be enough. Because it is, and it always was. 5. Pain and happiness are not opposites. In the winter of 1944, a Viennese psychiatrist was marched into Auschwitz-Birkenau. He had already lost his wife. He had lost his manuscript, years of work on the psychology of meaning that he had hidden in the lining of his coat, only to have it discovered and destroyed. He had lost his freedom, his identity, his name. He was now a number sewn onto the arm of a striped uniform. And yet, in the middle of that, in the middle of the worst thing a human being can experience, he noticed something. He noticed that the prisoners who survived psychologically were not the ones who suffered least. They were the ones who found something inside the suffering. A reason. A meaning. A way of making the pain serve something larger than the pain itself. He thought of his wife. He imagined her face with such intensity that it felt real. And he realized, in that imagining, in that love, there was something in him that the guards could not touch. No matter what they did to his body, they could not reach what he had found inside himself. And from that realization came one of the most important psychological insights of the 20th century. The last of human freedoms is the freedom to choose your attitude toward any given set of circumstances. His name was Viktor Frankl. He went on to write Man's Search for Meaning, one of the most widely read books in the history of the world. And the central claim of that book is not that suffering is good. It is that suffering and meaning can coexist. That pain and joy are not on opposite ends of a single line, they are on different axes entirely. You can feel both at the same time. You can grieve and still be grateful. You can be broken open and still experience moments of profound gladness. You can carry loss and still love the morning. We live in a culture that has decided pain is the absence of happiness, and happiness is the absence of pain. And this is a lie that is quietly destroying people. Because life contains pain. Inevitably. Unavoidably. Structurally. If you have decided you cannot be happy until the pain is gone, you have decided you cannot be happy. Full stop. Real happiness is not the elimination of pain. It is the capacity to carry pain and keep walking. To grieve without stopping completely. To be afraid and still choose. To feel the full weight of your losses and still find, somewhere in the rubble, a reason to stay fully alive. Frankl found it in an imagined face in a death camp. What is stopping you from finding it today? 6. Comparison is the fastest way to destroy what you have. In the early 1970s, one of the greatest tennis players of his generation was diagnosed with a heart condition that would eventually end his career. He had fought his way to the top against extraordinary odds. A black man in a sport still largely defined by privilege, wealth, and access. He had won Wimbledon. He had won the US Open. He had beaten players who had every structural advantage over him. And then, in the prime of what should have been his peak years, his body began to fail him. Later in life, he contracted HIV through a blood transfusion during heart surgery. He was facing death. And a journalist, struck by the stillness with which he seemed to carry this news, asked him directly, "How do you handle this? You've given so much to the world, and now this, don't you ever ask God, why me?" Arthur Ashe looked at the journalist and said, "When I was a young man playing tennis and winning, I never asked God why me. When I was healthy and being celebrated and succeeding, I never asked why me. So I have no right to ask it now." That is not resignation. That is the deepest kind of fairness a person can extend to their own life. An accounting of experience that does not cherry-pick which conditions deserve gratitude and which deserve complaint. A refusal to measure his suffering against someone else's easier chapter, because easier chapters end too. Comparison is the mechanism by which most people systematically destroy the happiness they already possess. They look at what someone else has, the relationship, the career, the body, the ease, the life that looks effortless from the outside, and they use that image to rewrite their own story into a story of lack, of inadequacy, of falling behind on a race whose finish line nobody can describe. But the comparison is always dishonest. You are seeing their highlights and measuring them against your entire reality, including the private parts, the failures, the fears, the 3 a.m. moments nobody posts about. You are seeing their best season and measuring it against your hardest chapter. You are looking at their front porch and deciding it represents their whole house. The Stoic practice of negative visualization corrects this. Not by imagining the worst, but by imagining the absence of what you already have. The absence of the people you love. The absence of ordinary comforts you walk past without noticing. The absence of your body functioning, your mind working, your freedom to choose how to spend this day. Run that exercise honestly, and what you have looks entirely different. What you have looks like enough. What you have, in many ways, looks like extraordinary luck. Stop measuring your life against someone else's filtered version of theirs. Measure your life against who you were yesterday. That is the only comparison that builds anything worth building. 7. Stillness is where happiness actually lives. In the early years of the 16th century, one of the most powerful men in England built himself a small study inside his house in Chelsea, London. He was Lord Chancellor, second only to the king in political power. His days were consumed by audiences, decisions, diplomacy, the relentless machinery of governance at the highest level. And yet, according to his daughter and the people who knew him best, he spent part of every single morning in that small, quiet room, alone, thinking, praying, going inward before the world demanded everything he had outward. His name was Thomas More. Years later, when the king's demands put More's conscience in direct conflict with his power, he chose his conscience. He was imprisoned in the Tower of London. And in those final days, stripped of everything, waiting for an execution that came on a Tuesday morning in July 1535, his daughter Margaret visited him. She begged him to recant, to save himself, to find some formula that would let him walk out alive. More told her something that stopped her cold. He said he was, in those final weeks, more at peace than he had been in all the years of his power and influence. Not because he was not afraid. Not because the loss was not real. But because he had finally stopped chasing. There was nothing left to want. Nothing left to protect. And in that absence of wanting, in that enforced stillness, he found something all his years of achieving had never delivered. We are a generation that has confused movement with progress. Busyness with meaning. Noise with life. We fill every silence with something because we are afraid of what we might feel if the noise stopped. We scroll because we do not know how to sit with ourselves. We chase because stillness feels like losing ground, when in truth, stillness is the only ground worth standing on. Real happiness, not the high of a good day, not the relief of a problem solved, not the temporary warmth of external validation. Real happiness lives in stillness. It lives in the moment when you are not trying to be somewhere other than where you are. When you are not performing, not managing, not chasing. When you are simply present with your own existence without needing it to be anything other than what it is. Marcus Aurelius returned again and again in his private journals to the practice of going inward. Stripping away the noise of the empire, the demands of the role, the weight of the world, and asking himself, what is actually real? What actually matters? What is actually good? Not as an escape from responsibility. As a daily recalibration that made him better at everything he was responsible for. Give yourself silence. Not as a reward for finishing everything. Not on the weekend, maybe, if things calm down. Now. Today. 10 minutes of actual quiet, with no agenda, no content consuming you, no one to perform for. Sit in the discomfort of your own company until the discomfort passes. And find what is there when the noise stops. What is there might surprise you. What is there might be the only thing that was ever going to make you happy. 8. Your relationship with yourself is the foundation of everything. In October 1918, a 12-year-old girl named Anna Eleanor Roosevelt lost her mother. Her father, whom she adored, had already died 4 years before. She was sent to live with her grandmother, a woman described as cold and formal, and grew up in houses that were full of people and almost entirely without warmth. By the time she was a teenager, she had been told, explicitly and by multiple people she trusted, that she was not beautiful, not charming, not the kind of woman who would amount to anything remarkable. She married Franklin Roosevelt. The marriage was publicly celebrated and privately complicated, fractured by an affair she discovered in 1918 that she never fully recovered from. She had 6 children. She managed a household, a political career that was never officially hers, a public image built partly on pretense. And for years, she later said, she did not know who she was when the performance stopped. Then she began the long, painful, deliberate work of finding out. She took on causes that scared her. She went places she was told women like her should not go: coal mines, slums, field hospitals during the Second World War. She challenged people far more powerful than her because she had decided that her sense of herself could not be built on the approval of powerful people. And slowly, through the accumulation of hard things she had survived, she built something inside herself that nobody had given her and nobody could take away. Eleanor Roosevelt went on to become one of the most admired human beings of the 20th century. Not because her circumstances improved. They remained complicated and painful for most of her life. But because she had built an inner relationship with herself that was sturdy enough to carry the weight of those circumstances without collapsing under them. She once wrote, "You gain strength, courage, and confidence by every experience in which you really stop to look fear in the face. You must do the thing you think you cannot do. Not because someone will cheer. Not because it is guaranteed to work. But because doing the hard thing is how you teach yourself that you are trustworthy. That you keep your word. That you are someone worth being." Most people have a worse relationship with themselves than they have with anyone else in their lives. They speak to themselves with contempt they would never direct at a friend. They break promises to themselves casually, repeatedly, and then feel the quiet accumulation of self-betrayal as a vague, constant shame they cannot name. They abandon their own standards the moment things get difficult, and then wonder why confidence feels permanently out of reach. Your happiness is inseparable from your self-respect. Not arrogance. Not the performance of confidence. Self-respect, the deep, earned daily knowledge that you keep your word to yourself. That you treat yourself with the same patience and honesty you would offer someone you love. That you are not at war with your own existence. The most important relationship you will ever build, repair, or protect is the one you have with the person looking back at you in the mirror. Start there. Start today. And do not stop. 9. Choose your life actively, or someone else will choose it for you. On the morning of December 22, 1849, a 27-year-old Russian novelist was led into Semyonovsky Square in St. Petersburg along with a group of other political prisoners. They were told they were going to be executed. They were given last rites. They were dressed in white death shirts and led to stakes in the frozen ground. A firing squad stood opposite them, rifles raised. The order to fire was not given. At the last possible moment, in what was later revealed to be a piece of grotesque theater staged on direct orders of the Tsar to maximize psychological terror, a messenger arrived with a last-minute commutation. The executions were called off. The prisoners would be sent to hard labor in Siberia instead. One of those prisoners, watching the men around him collapse in relief and shock, stood very still. Later, he described the experience this way: he had believed, fully and completely, that he had 4 minutes left to live. And in those 4 minutes, he had become more conscious of his life, more aware of the texture of each second, more grateful for the cold air, the pale sky, the mere fact of existing, than he had been in all the previous years combined. His name was Fyodor Dostoevsky. He spent 4 years in a Siberian labor camp in conditions designed to strip a man of everything. When he emerged, his health was damaged, his early reputation was largely forgotten, and he had developed a gambling addiction that would plague him for the rest of his life. But he had also gained something no comfort could have given him. He had stood in front of a firing squad and been handed his life back. And from that morning forward, he never stopped being astonished that he was alive. He went on to write Crime and Punishment, The Idiot, The Brothers Karamazov, Demons, novels so ferociously alive, so saturated with the full weight of human experience, that people still read them with a kind of disbelief that a human being produced them. He wrote as a man who had felt his life almost end and decided, in that moment, what he was going to do with whatever remained. He chose his life. Actively. Deliberately. With both eyes open. Most people live passively. Not because they are lazy. Not because they are cowardly. But because they have never been confronted with their finitude so directly. Nobody has stood them in front of a firing squad. Nobody has forced the question, if you had 4 minutes left, what would you wish you had done with what came before? But the question is always there. Every morning is that question. Every day you wake up and move through the hours without choosing, without intention, without direction, without the active assertion of what this day is for, is a day you hand your life over to habit, to fear, to the path of least resistance. And a life not actively chosen produces a particular kind of suffering, the low, constant feeling that something important is being missed. That somewhere you made a turn you cannot find your way back to. Happiness is not passive. It does not descend on you when the conditions align. It is built, daily, through choices. The choice to get up when everything in you says stay down. The choice to invest in something that will outlast the moment. The choice to live by your values even when nobody is watching. The choice to be the author of your story rather than a minor character in someone else's. Dostoevsky needed a firing squad to teach him this. You have something he did not have in that square in 1849. You have this moment, right now, with the full knowledge of what it costs to waste it. Choose your life. Choose it consciously. Choose it today. Closing. 2,000 years ago, a slave with a broken leg sat in chains and refused to be unhappy. Not because his life was easy. Not because his circumstances were fair. Not because anyone had come to rescue him or fix what had been broken. He refused because he had understood something most free men never do, that happiness is not a gift the world gives you. It is a practice you build inside yourself, independent of what the world decides to do. It is a posture. A discipline. A daily choice that compounds over time into something no circumstance can simply take away. Epictetus was eventually freed. He built a school on the outskirts of Rome. He taught for decades. And the students who came to study under him did not come for comfort. They came for something harder and more valuable, the knowledge of how to be genuinely, durably, unshakably happy. Not in easy circumstances, but in all circumstances. Not when everything is working, but especially when it is not. That is what you have been building today. Not a mood. Not a feeling that lasts until the next hard thing arrives and shatters it. A practice. A philosophy. A way of inhabiting your own life that does not depend on conditions being right, on people staying, on outcomes landing exactly where you needed them to land. Stop waiting for permission to feel good. Protect your inner world like the sovereign territory it is. Practice gratitude not as sentimentality but as armor. Release the need for validation from people who are still trying to validate themselves. Let pain and happiness coexist without contradiction, because they always have. Quit the comparison that destroys what you already have. Find the stillness where real peace actually lives. Build a relationship with yourself worth having. And choose your life, actively, deliberately, with both hands every single day. Be happy with yourself first. Not because the world deserves your happiness. Because you do. Because the people you love deserve a version of you that is not perpetually deferred, perpetually waiting, perpetually half alive while you wait for conditions to improve. Everything you want to build, every relationship, every achievement, every version of a life that feels like it means something, grows from a person who has decided, once and for all, that they are worth being happy. That they do not need the world's permission. That the line is already drawn, and inside that line they are free. You are already inside the line. You always were. If this reached something real in you today, subscribe to Inner Steel right now. Hit the notification bell. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. We are not just building a channel here. We are building a way of living. I will see you in the next one.